Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're embarking on a pretty incredible journey. We're going to start by looking at the macro history of an oppressive empire, and then zoom all the way down into the micro-level survival of just one single man. We're unpacking Alexander Solzhenitsyn's absolute masterpiece, One Day in the Life of Ivan Denisovich. We're going to explore how a seemingly simple story, just an ordinary day in a brutal Siberian labor camp, somehow managed to fundamentally change world literature and expose the raw, beating heart of human dignity. Here is our roadmap for today. First up, we'll look at the literary miracle. Then we'll dive into A Single Ordinary Day, followed by Finding Inner Freedom. After that, we'll explore the Skaz tradition, and we'll wrap things up with Healing Collective Trauma. All right, let's jump right into Section 1, The Literary Miracle, a novel that shook the world. To really get this book, you have to understand the world it was born into, a heavily censored Soviet Union. From 1950 to 1953, Solzhenitsyn himself was actually imprisoned in a forced labor camp in Kazakhstan. He was entirely stripped of his name, assigned to a masonry brigade, and reduced to just a number. It wasn't until 1959, living in Ryazan, that he conceived and wrote the manuscript, and for 2 whole years it just sat hidden. But, sensing a subtle shift in the political winds, he took a risk and submitted it to the Novy Mir journal in 1961. By 1962, right in the middle of Nikita Khrushchev's thaw, it was officially published. It went from a secret, lived trauma to a completely groundbreaking publication almost overnight. Just listen to this quote from the legendary poet Anna Akhmatova. She declared, "Every single citizen of the 200 million inhabitants of the Soviet Union has the duty to read this text and commit it to memory." Think about that. This wasn't just a regular book release. It was a total cultural earthquake. It literally smashed through government censorship and suddenly made the whole world aware of the realities of the Gulag. And it really matters to us today because it fundamentally changed how modern societies process hidden uncomfortable truths. Moving right along to Section 2, A Single Ordinary Day, Surviving the Siberian Camp. So how exactly does Solzhenitsyn frame this day? Well, it comes down to a really fascinating concept called traumatic realism. Basically, this is a way of documenting profound historical trauma, but doing it through mundane, everyday realities. You see, Solzhenitsyn completely avoids sensationalism. He doesn't rely on extreme violence to shock you. Instead, the horror speaks through the tiny, everyday details of survival. It's in the careful, desperate way Zhukov hides a tiny piece of a hacksaw blade, or how getting an extra ounce of bread is treated with this almost spiritual reverence. Inside this incredibly mundane reality, the camp operates on a totally brutal, materialistic code. An old prisoner named Kuzyomin actually calls it the law of the jungle. He tells the men, don't lick another prisoner's bowl, don't squeal on your fellow inmates, and whatever you do not count on the doctors to save your life. It's an intensely pragmatic worldview, right? It implies that to survive, you just have to rely entirely on force and cunning. But, as we're going to see, true survival actually requires something way deeper than that.
And who exactly had to live by these brutal rules? Well, the camp was basically a perfect microcosm of the USSR itself. You had former peasants like Zhukov literally rubbing shoulders with disgraced secret police. There were religious minorities like the Baptists. You even had loyal military and naval officers who were faithful communists but still somehow ended up imprisoned, right alongside the intelligentsia. The whole system functioned through pure terror, implying that under this regime, virtually everyone was a prisoner to some degree.
Now, the physical unfreedom they faced was absolute. Just picture this. It's Siberia, January 1951. The temperature is negative 27 degrees. And yet, before they can even head out to do their grueling manual labor, the prisoners are stripped down to their underwear and searched by guards in the bitter cold. The authorities force this pointlessly brutal procedure just to make sure no one is hiding an extra layer of clothing or a tool. It completely exposes the sadistic stupidity of the camp system and the absolute physical vulnerability of the inmates. Which brings us to Section 3, Finding Inner Freedom, the Spirit versus the System. So, faced with that kind of misery, how do you survive? Solzhenitsyn actually gives us 2 completely different paths. Take Fedyukov, for example. He scavenges, he begs for cigarettes, and he literally licks out other prisoners' bowls. He surrenders all his dignity just to survive physically. But by doing that, he becomes spiritually changed to the material world. Now compare him to Zhukov and the Baptist prisoner Alyoshka. They maintain this intense moral restraint. Zhukov always takes off his hat to eat, refusing to act like an animal. Alyoshka practices Christian asceticism. By restricting themselves and clinging to their dignity, they actually find a profound inner freedom that the camp literally cannot strip away. And here's one of the most fascinating ways this inner freedom shows up through work.
Finding freedom in forced labor sounds crazy, right? But it provides a beneficial distraction that actually builds the prisoner's self-worth, completely transcending their grim environment. When Shukov is laying bricks, he works with this fierce intensity. He takes immense pride in building a wall straight and true. For those few hours, the pure creative joy of the work makes him forget the agonizing cold and his physical pain. He finds a space of total, pure freedom inside the very forced labor that was designed to break him.
But it gets even deeper. The absolute highest form of inner freedom isn't just about hard work. It's found in what we can call the eye for the other mentality. Look at Gang 104. They totally reject the everyman for himself rule of the camp. They operate like a protective family. Their boss, Tierin, actually sacrifices to protect his men from deadly work assignments. The two Estonian prisoners share absolutely every single shred of tobacco they have, and Alyoshka willingly and cheerfully serves anyone who asks him for help. It is exactly this moral responsibility that becomes the ultimate act of defiance against a totalitarian system.
Let's zoom out a bit for Section 4, the Skaz tradition, voices of the camps.
To tell a story this raw and authentic, Solzhenitsyn had to completely shatter traditional Soviet literary rules. So he revived this old 19th century Russian literary form known as skaz. Basically, this is a narrative form where the language of the narrator exactly matches the language of the characters and their specific environment. By using this really spontaneous personal slang, Solzhenitsyn broke right through rigid state propaganda and gave a desperately needed authentic voice straight back to the marginalized prisoners of the Gulag.
And the way he pulls this off is just brilliant. He incorporated incredibly distinct camp slang, words like zek for prisoner or kasha for porridge, which instantly established a real sense of community. He didn't shy away from obscenities either, perfectly matching the harsh environment. He used the Leskovian tradition of short, concise, almost rhythmic sentences that actually mirror the steady, repetitive act of laying bricks. And perhaps most cleverly, he created this represented discourse, seamlessly blending the voice of the narrator with Shukov's internal thoughts. So as a reader, you're experiencing objective reality and a deeply personal commentary at the exact same time.
Finally, we arrive at Section 5, Healing Collective Trauma, Truth as Medicine.
To really grasp the cultural impact of this book, we need to talk about glasnost. Long before that term became famous globally in the 1980s, the post-Stalinist Russian public was already desperately starving for openness, transparency, and just the unvarnished truth. The physical walls of the labor camps were definitely still standing, but the literary walls had to fall first. The trauma was everywhere, but no one was allowed to even speak of it. Solzhenitsyn's novel was basically the battering ram that forced that openness.
Why was this literary openness so absolutely crucial? It really comes down to the difference between hard memory and soft memory. Hard memory relies on physical things, monuments, museums, memorials, which obviously the Soviet state was never going to build for the victims of the Gulag. Because of that, the nation had to rely entirely on soft memory, poetry, underground memoirs, and literature. For a population that had literally nowhere to go to mourn, a novel like this functioned as a textual monument. It was the one and only place people could finally go to collectively acknowledge what had happened to them.
You really cannot overstate the impact of that acknowledgement. As the liberal Soviet literary press declared at the time, a wound that still bleeds must be healed and not cravenly hidden from sight, and there is only one cure: truth. By meticulously detailing just one ordinary, freezing, brutal day, Solzhenitsyn delivered that truth. He provided the exact psychological medicine that a massive, profoundly traumatized population so desperately needed.
And that leaves us with a really profound, lingering question. How do we sustain value and dignity in an unjust and chaotic world? Shukov, Alyoshka, and the men of Gang 104 show us that true freedom isn't necessarily about what's happening to you on the outside. It's an internal choice. It's found in moral restraint, in taking pride in good work, and in caring for the person right next to you, even when the entire world is telling you to only look out for yourself. I really hope this explainer gave you a new framework for understanding this towering piece of literature. Thanks so much for joining me today, and keep asking those big questions.